Another thing that we look at with a lot of our runners is how they run. So we do a running analysis on everybody using film, okay? And we also use these things called RunScribes, which we put on the bottom of people's shoes, and it gives us a little bit more detail as to your cadence, how much shock is going through your foot, how your foot is moving, are we heel striking, forefoot striking, and what's happening when we're running. It gives us a little more detail than our eyes can see. And then we look at all these factors together and kind of see how is your running. Is it asymmetrical or not, right? So I'm going to look at Sean over here, and we're going to do a little running analysis. So the first couple things that we look at when we do a running analysis, okay, is we start at the head, okay, and we make sure that everything's moving in a nice linear and vertical manner, right? We don't want it to see going too high or too low, okay? The next thing we look at is the right arm, okay, crossing over the left arm. So our arm's swinging really far across our body, okay, when we're running. Next thing we look at moving down is the hips, okay? So if I draw a line here, okay, are my hips being really bouncy, or do I have one hip, okay, if I pause it, that's dropping more than the other? When I use a line, right when I land, sometimes you'll see a hip drop one more from side to side. If we do see that, then we might need to work a little bit more on our hip strength, okay, or work on how we're pushing through the ground. The last two things that we look at here, okay, when we're running is our knee window. So if I were to draw the circle here, okay, do I have a little bit of space between my knees, okay, when I'm running? If I do, okay, that means I'm not having too much force going inside, and all of the force that I'm producing is helping me go forward. Last thing we look at in the running analysis, okay, are my foot crossing midline, okay? So sometimes you can have one foot crossing over to your left side, like my right foot could cross over to my left side, or my left foot can cross over to my right side, okay? So we make sure that both feet are symmetrical when you're running. All right, so from this view, okay, what we're really looking at, okay, is where is my foot striking relative to my body, the center of my mass, okay? So you ideally, okay, want your foot to be striking, okay, under your center of your mass, okay, to know that you're pushing the ground away from you and not pulling it, or it's having as a braking force in front of you, okay? So when I draw a line here, Sean does a great job, okay, of when his foot hits the ground, back up a frame or two, okay, his foot is sitting relatively under his body when he's landing there. So you want to make sure, sometimes what'll happen is people's foot and their shin will be a little bit in front of them, okay? That'll, one, put you on your heel a bit, but two, it kind of acts as a braking force when you're running. And when that happens, it kind of pushes you backwards instead of propelling you forwards. An easy way to fix that is to look at your cadence and see if your cadence is a little bit low, and you can always work on picking that up slightly. Good. So again, Sean does a great job of landing with his feet under him and pushing the ground away from him. Okay, good on that one. So the next thing we use, using the RunScribe's piece of technology that we looked at for Sean, okay, the first thing that we look at, okay, is going to be his cadence, right? So that's where you see steps per minute. Now, ideally, it's supposed to be between 165 and we'll see upwards from 180. We rarely see 190, but that's the optimal range for your cadence to typically be at, okay? The next thing that we'll look at, okay, is his foot symmetry. So this gives me a little bit of a picture of how he's landing in his foot, right? So is he landing more forefoot like Sean is here, okay? So you see the pressure in the middle of his foot, or is he a little bit more heel foot? So he's not much of a rear foot striker, okay? Again, it'll show me a little bit. Maybe he puts a little bit more pressure through the left foot than the right, okay? The next thing that I'm going to come down and look at, okay, is going to be his shock, okay? So shock is how much ground reaction forces you have going through the legs at one time, okay? So he's got 13 and 13 on both sides, so pretty symmetrical total shock, okay? However, when it gets towards that 14 or higher, that starts to be a little bit high. It breaks it down into my impact shock and my braking shock, which is going to be my vertical forces versus my horizontal forces. So my braking shock, okay, are going to be those braking forces, those horizontal vectors, okay? So he's sitting in a good range for those. His impact shock looks to be a little bit higher, so he's a little bit more of a vertical runner, which we saw on his film. He had a little bit more bounce in his step, okay? However, it's still in a safe range, and that with his cadence, it looks really good. So I'm happy with how Sean's running there. The next thing that we look at is pronation. So how much your foot rotates in or out when you're moving, okay? So Sean has 8 degrees and 6 degrees on both sides, and which is a pretty safe range. Anywhere above 18 degrees, we start to get concerned about maybe we need to look at your little bit more midfoot control, or consider an orthotic or something inside the shoe, work on your arch strength and balance as well. So overall, Sean looks like a pretty good runner, but these are all the things that the RunScribes can tell us.